Hi, Principal Matters listeners. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, back with my co-host, Dr. Jen Schwanke, who I don't think I need to intro every single time to who we are and what we do, but it's so much fun to just remind people that you're an author of 4 great books and the deputy superintendent of Dublin, Ohio. And I need to mention I'm the author of 3 great books because my brother was listening to my podcast recently. He's like, how come you never talk about your stuff? And I was like, oh, I guess I should every once in a while mention that, since recently one of the guys I've coached for a while didn't even realize I wrote books. So I was like, okay, I guess every once in a while I need to mention I do that too. So welcome back, Jen. And we always start off the show with Q&A before our special guest this week will be an interview with Danielle Nuhfer. You're going to love this conversation. But here's this week's question. How can I use my time effectively while also making time for self-care? Wow, Jen, the question that seems to come up in every conversation that I have with myself and leaders, but I'm going to let you go first.
Well, and you did say that offline. You said, wow, this question keeps coming up. And that tells us that it's an important question that hasn't yet been answered. And here's why I think it hasn't yet been answered. The answer is so different for everyone. I think that, sometimes self-care, when people are asking about self-care, they're asking about time. Where can I get more time? Sometimes they're asking for more health. They want to feel healthier mentally or physically. They might be asking for more family time, for more movies time, for more book time, for more walk time. And so I think that answer is really different for everyone. And also the capacity, the mental cumulative load of these jobs is different for everyone. So it's hard to answer. That's a long preamble there. And so the question when I read it, how can I use time effectively while also making time for self-care? I think the first step is determining what you mean when you ask that question. You know, where are you spending your time and where are there holes? Where are you looking and saying, yeah, but that's where I'm not fulfilled, whether it's family or health or leisure activities, whatever. And then you have to kind of start to build that answer for yourself, for your own life, and for all the things that pull from you.
I agree. And, I was just talking to a leader yesterday who was telling me how important it is for him. He calls it time blocking, chunking into his calendar the things that are most important. And I do think that's important because when you prioritize your time in your calendar, then you see where those things are going to happen. I'm just going to say for me, Jen, the biggest way that self-care has become a routine for me is that word, routine. It's like I build it into my day just like I do brushing my teeth or taking a shower. It's like when I get up, I'm going to exercise first because that's the best time of day for me. And I'm not prescribing this for everybody else, but I just know that for me as a leader, if I didn't do it before school, it didn't happen. Um, and because it became such a priority for me, I gauged my night before when I'm going to bed based on what tomorrow morning's going to look like and how much of a workout I can get in. And that's just one little piece of self-care. Self-care is way more than just exercise. But for me, man, that's a big part. And I know it is for you too. It's a big part of me staying like, I don't know, having a better sense of myself and a better state of mind when I step into work, having done that first.
Well, it makes me think, as you're speaking, it makes me think of a conversation I had with my friend Rita. And her time for self-care is going to be different than mine because she has a 45-minute commute to work every day and I don't. And so for her to carve out time for self-care and maybe go home or come back for an evening event doesn't work. And so she gets to work at 6:15 in the morning because she wants to go. She wants to have a couple of unsustained or unbroken, sustained amount of time. Then she works her work day. And then many days she can go home. And then she has a block of self-care time. Now, that wouldn't be as important for someone who has a 2-minute commute to work. So again, I think it's about sitting down, looking at those blocks that you referred to, looking at your wants and your needs, and putting time into those blocks. And it has to be personalized. It reminds me a little bit of an IEP. And we can call it the ICP, the individual care plan. Think about what you want, think about what you're not getting, create those time blocks and dump some things in there. I think that, Will and Jen cannot possibly sit here and tell people how to care for themselves, but we can tell you some philosophical ways to approach that answer.
Um, Thank you, Jen, for that. I want to just add as we wrap up this Q&A, a resource that's been helpful for me in reflecting on my own self-care. And that is, it's a life score assessment from Michael Hyatt that I go through every year at the end of a school year. And so since we're at the end of a calendar year, and since this is conversations coming out in November, I will just refer you guys to check this out at Michael Hyatt's website. It's too long for me to read it here, but it gives you an opportunity just to take a quick assessment, and it asks you 10 questions. And in those 10 questions, you identify those areas of your health, your physical fitness, your family time, if your time with your partner or spouse, your own um, assessment of your own spiritual growth, your finances, all these things, Jen, that what that does for me is it gives me kind of a chance to look in the mirror and go, okay, maybe I'm doing some things here that have been helpful, but if I'm not intentional about this, it's probably not going to happen for
Right.
me. And the one year I did that, when all my girls were in middle school, high school, I realized how little time I was spending with them. And so I made it an intentional goal every single week to try to get time just one-on-one with them for some dad-daughter time. And I wouldn't have done that had I not taken a chance to just reflect. So Principal Matters listeners, as we wrap up this conversation on using your time effectively, don't beat yourself up. Give yourself the grace to realize that we do what we schedule, but it's also important for us to reflect on that. And I do have a book called Pause, Breathe, Flourish, Living Your Best Life as an Educator, where I actually write about all 10 of those areas that I reflect on regularly too. So Jen,
I
how
am I am glad to hear you talk about your books. And listeners, about 6 months ago, I said, Will, you always, open with my information so beautifully. Talk about yourself. And you were like, no, I can't do that. So I'm glad you did. Good job.
all right, Jen, how can people stay connected with you if they want to reach out this week?
JenSchwanke.com.
That's right. And you can find me or my resources at my website at williamdparker.com. Thanks, Jen. And thank you, Principal Matters listeners, for doing what matters.
Thanks, everyone.
Hey, friends, just one other quick note before we jump into today's conversation with Danielle Nuhfer. I failed to turn on my recording mic in this interview, so you're going to hear the audio quality of my voice coming through a separate mic, through a camera instead of through my recording mic. So I apologize for the audio difference, but Danielle's feedback was just way too powerful for me not to run with this interview after it was recorded. So I hope you enjoyed today's podcast episode, A Pathway for Mindful Teachers with Danielle Nuhfer, Principal Matters Podcast, episode 422. Hi, friends. This is Will Parker, host of Principal Matters, the School Leaders Podcast, where each week we bring you inspiring, innovative, and imaginative ideas for your own school leadership. And this week, we're going to be talking about pathways for mindful teachers with my special guest, Danielle Nuhfer, who is a former teacher turned coach and the author of The Path of the Mindful Teacher. She's dedicated over 20 years to supporting educators in navigating the challenges of the school system. And as the founder of Teaching Well, she works with teachers and school leaders to prioritize well-being and transform schools into thriving learning communities. Danielle, welcome to Principal Matters Podcast. Why don't you fill in the gaps in that intro and tell listeners something else they may be surprised to know about you?
All right. So I think something that these school leaders might be surprised to know is that after 20 years, I am a teacher who went through 2 bouts of burnout and is still ready to be a part of the education system. So I see this time as a time of opportunity, and I'm really hopeful that this is an opportunity for schools to do some different things that we may not have thought of before or prioritized before, but is needed. And yeah, I think that hopefulness could be surprising in some of these climates.
Love that. So let me set the stage for Principal Matters listeners, because I have some guests on my shows or people I've reached out to directly. Sometimes people reach out to me. And when I saw your information, I was like, wow, we resonate. Because I wrote a book called Pause, Breathe, Flourish right after the pandemic for educators with that whole idea of self-care in mind too. And a lot of the people I work with, although I work with teachers, I mostly work with leaders. But you've had such a heart for helping educators to figure out how to continue to do this work. And as you told me here, but also off script, that you went through 2 bouts of burnout yourself in the 20 years you were teaching. And when you figured out the things that helped you recover and stay connected and love the work, you were like, man, I've got to help other people to stay thriving in their work too. And so all the way back in 2016, you started doing this work, helping leaders and teachers. And then in 2023, you decided to do it full time. So congratulations
Thank
on
you.
that amazing work. But take us back into your story, Danielle, and help listeners understand what it's like to get to, and I know people listening have, almost every educator I know has been through that moment, and that crucial moment in their own work experience. But I want you to share yours and some of the things you learned from that experience.
Yeah, and I want to start, and I know we didn't talk about this, and I don't talk about it all that often. I want to start with why the burnout turnaround happened. And it was because of my principal. And
Mm,
that's why I feel so connected to working with school leaders, because my principal was the one that drew it to my attention that something was wrong. And that was about 4 years into my career. And he had a conversation that I know he did not know where it was going to go, but he had that conversation anyhow. And I will commend him because he said, the person that I'm hiring is not the person who's sitting in front of me. What is going on? And I told him I was fine. So I want to tell all your principals and leaders out there that when a teacher tells you they're fine, you still may be igniting a spark in them. And he ignited that spark in me, and we still talk about that. And so I took that like that denial, and I did some reflection over that lovely summer vacation, which is always a nice thing to have. And I really started to do some soul searching. I was in my early 20s, and I was going through just a lot of stuff. Personally, and it was just kind of bubbling over into my professional life, and I couldn't see it, but he could. So I really give him a lot of credit for, just breaking the ice and saying, I don't know what's going on, but something's up. So to make, to just kind of move forward, I found a lot of things that helped me outside of the classroom, but I wasn't seeing. So this was probably, I'm going to date myself. This is probably in 2006 by this point. And there wasn't a lot of examples for people bringing self-care into a school. In fact, that was pretty frowned upon in those years. So I just kind of knew that I needed to do something different than the things I was seeing around me. And I brought lots of tools that I learned outside of school into my classroom for me, not necessarily for my teacher or for my students, but it kind of, that ripple effect. I was different, and I was living differently, and my life was more balanced. And that allowed me to show up differently with my students and for my students. But then what happens is that you start to do everything great, and then people start to ask you to do more and more things at school. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yes.
And in 2014, I found myself like taking on all these responsibilities, and then again going up against another bout of burnout. That same principal, still there, still doing an excellent job. I was in the summer getting my classroom ready, and kind of just like melted down into tears after having a conversation with another friend. And I basically didn't want to come back to school because I didn't have boundaries. I didn't know how to say no. I didn't know how to like recalibrate things. And I ended up going on 2 spring semester sabbaticals for education. And I learned all about mindfulness for educators. Saw, oh my goodness, like I want to work with adults. I want to work with the teachers that are teaching these kids, because we love giving curriculum to students, and it's such a good thing. But we need to help our teachers, because if we don't support our teachers, they are not going to be able to give the content and the learning what the kids need. It's just not going to transform through them. So that's why I've now become sitting here.
Well, I love those stories, and thank you for being so vulnerable. And um, you know, for Principal Matters listeners, there's a great conversation that they're going to hear a couple of episodes before this one with Wes Cottingham, who was a great principal who also shared his burnout experience in leadership, where he got to the point where he just had so much decision fatigue that he was having a hard time showing up to work, and he ended up transitioning and figuring out, okay, what's that next thing for me? And then eventually stepped into working as a professor. And as he's training leaders, this is the thing he talks to them about: is you've got to figure out these boundaries so that you can do this work long term. And so So I want to sit here for a few minutes, Danielle, and ask you about some things that I know you've shared with me in advance, but I want to ask you to unpack them. And those are understanding internal scripts, leading with awareness, and flipping your autopilot reactions. So let's just take them one at a time and talk to me first about how understanding internal scripts has been helpful for you in educator self-care.
So I think understanding our scripts is really understanding why we're feeling a certain way when a certain thing happens. So
Mhm.
it's that, um, like, what's going on? Like, why am I so irritated at this certain situation? Or why does this certain situation grind my gears so much? And it's really about understanding that there's so much underlying that's going on. And we might just see this, like, this one kid or this one situation or this one parent or this one thing that just really gets us emotionally charged. And when we pause and we start to understand our scripts, we start to see there's more to it, that we bring with us all of the things that we have experienced in the past. And I love this quote, and I don't know exactly who said it, is we see things not as they are, but as we are, like all of the things that are happening are as a result of the experiences that we have had previously. So just understanding that and knowing what those things are going to be that are going to tip us off, that awareness is key in responding to our days a lot differently.
Wow. So I love that quote too. We see things not as they are, but as we are. What a great perspective check to my follow-up thought is I've had conversations with educators and especially leaders who struggle sometimes with why am I not getting through to this person? Or why does this person not recognize how much I can help them? Or why? And there's all these, and usually the questions are centered around, I want to be understood.
Mhm.
And what I have found myself saying to leaders like that is something you need to understand about human nature. I'm sad to say this, but this is just my experience, is most people aren't thinking about you.
Mhm.
They're thinking about them.
Mhm.
And so when people respond or they have questions or they're curious, most people, not all, but most people are asking those from the place of, I'm going to use your words, from their own script.
Mhm.
This is how I see the world. So therefore, my curiosity is based on me, my script, not necessarily really trying to understand you. So stay there for a minute, Danielle, because I'm curious how, when we do suddenly can take a step back from ourselves, which is what you're suggesting, and understand the narratives we're telling ourselves, the stories we're telling ourselves, how does that help us better than have a lens for what's right in front of us and the other people in front of us?
So it allows us to see that there's like this wider truth that is happening all around us, right? Like, and once you start practicing this, like just that pause, and that's what I really would encourage people to do when they start to understand their scripts. When one of those things happens, can you pause and take a wider view of the situation? That I think is extremely helpful, and it sounds like it's going to take a long time to do, but once you start to practice it, you're like, oh, there's that thing again. I need to get curious about this. And you almost have to have a sense of humor about yourself. I mean, I certainly do. I'm certainly like, oh, there I go again. There it is again. That thing that I always get riled up about. Wow, isn't that interesting that that's happening today?
Well, and I think you're taking us into point number two, which is lead with awareness. So talk about what happens when you become more aware. How does that change the way that you serve and lead?
Well, I'll say for me,
Mhm.
when I lead with awareness, I don't take things as personally. And I think that has been transformative in my teaching and in my coaching and in leading, especially like working with school districts when they continually say, no, we don't have the money. No, we don't have, and I'm like, I'm going to stop taking this personally. If everybody had the money, I know we'd all be doing all the things, right? Like I have to not take this personally. And I think that when you lead with awareness, that is, it's just helpful. Like it's helpful because again, like you said, like it's not about you. It's about all of us have our own, and then another quote, we're all fighting a battle that none of us can see, right? Like we're all like in this war that none of us can see the clear total picture of everyone's other experience.
Wow. Okay. I've got to sit there. We're all fighting a battle that none of us can see. And what I love about that perspective, first of all, it's just wisdom, which is um, pausing long enough to recognize that maybe you don't see the full picture.
Mhm.
And I love it that your awareness leads you to curiosity, which is, okay, maybe this isn't about me. Maybe
Mhm.
their response is about something completely different. So I'm not taking this personally. I'm
Mhm.
curious enough to try to figure out what's going on here that
Mhm.
can help me then respond
Mhm.
to. I heard a presentation recently from Dr. Jen Schwanke. She's got a book on helping principals manage conflict. And she said, with our children, in our best moments, when they're melting down or they're having difficulties, we'll respond by asking ourselves, I wonder what's going on with them. Are they hungry? Are they sleepy? Are they overwhelmed?
Mhm.
Those are in our best moments. In our worst moments, we respond to them by just, direction and scolding or punishment or, or whatever, because we're not curious enough to figure out why they're responding the way they are.
Mhm.
And I guess the challenge is, how are we doing that to ourselves?
Mhm.
Are we willing enough to take a step back from ourselves and go, and other people, and be curious first before responding?
Mhm.
So, anything you want to add to that before I ask the next question?
No, I think that's great.
Okay, so let's talk about when you are more aware of those internal scripts,
Mhm.
when you're able to therefore respond with awareness,
Mhm.
then explain what you mean by flipping your autopilot reactions.
So what I mean by that is usually, and I think it goes along with what you just said, usually we have a reaction to, it's usually the same sort of reaction to the same sort of stimulus. It happens. This is what I do when a kid's late. This is what I do when a teacher says this. This is what I do. So that's the autopilot reaction.
Mhm.
So what I'm challenging people to think about is, how can I flip the script? Even if I don't need to actually know what is going on with that teacher or that student. Like it might be on me, it might be beyond my scope, but can I flip the script? Can I do or think that there's another possibility out there of something that I'm not sure of? And then proceed from that place.
Let's take a moment to thank our sponsors, and then we'll be right back. Everyone talks about the power of data-driven instruction, but how do you actually get the right insights and know the best next steps? The secret is IXL. IXL helps you easily assess performance and determines the best path forward for each student. Whether you need data for benchmarking or intervention planning, IXL can do it all. And IXL doesn't stop at assessments. It also provides you with everything else your school needs, from a standards-aligned K-12 curriculum to actionable analytics. IXL's online learning and teaching platform is research proven to improve student outcomes and is used by 95 of the top 100 U.S. school districts. If you also want to start driving real progress, get started today at ixl.com/PM. Support for Principal Matters comes from EduSkills. Let's face it, many schools are trying to support their Title III and multilingual programs on their own. And if that's you, it's time to take your support to the next level with EduSkills. EduSkills is designed by former educators as a go-to platform for support for K-12 multilingual programs. They understand the value of multilingual students, and they give educators the tools that they need to help all students succeed. From improving language acquisition to boosting family engagement, EduSkills offers cutting-edge tech and services for districts of all sizes. With easy setup and ongoing support, they'll make sure your transition is smooth and effective, and that more students are receiving better services. Ready to get started? Visit eduskillsllc.com or call 405-879-9898 to schedule a demo. EduSkills, breaking barriers and building bridges for multilingual education. So let's, I love that. So let's now, because you know what I'm getting ready to ask next, which is what every educator asks, like, well, tell me what that looks like.
Yeah.
Let's get really practical and let's do a couple of scenarios. And I
Okay.
don't care which way you want to go. Let's talk about either teacher students or teacher parents or leaders, teachers, but walk us through a couple of examples, Danielle, of how this cycle of understanding your internal scripts, leading with awareness and flipping your autopilot reactions look like in real life.
Okay, so I'll give you my most pressing is the one that I always would do. And it was when a kid came late to my class, I automatically engaged and thought he was doing something silly. And I say him because it was usually, I taught ninth grade high school English, and whoever he was, they would show up in my class and they'd be late and I would immediately engage. And my script was, you're being disrespectful, right? Like, so what would normally happen, what would happen before I would pick this apart is I would engage with him. We would have words. I might be just, sarcastic, like, oh, thanks for showing up, like that sort of like, glad you're here. We've been, like I would engage with him. The script was going. And what I had to do, so again, like nothing was good coming of this, right? So what it looked like after that, when I started to apply this, understanding my scripts, leading with awareness and flipping them, was that the kids still showed up late. So that wasn't ever going to change. Like I had to prepare for that. Like they're never going to not show up late. Like there's always going to be that. And what I needed to do was I stopped taking it personally. So I led with that awareness piece. And my script flipped was, I have no idea what was going on. Now, it resulted in him being late. He still needed to have whatever disciplinary action was there. But what I did was I put a piece of paper on his desk and he wrote to me what was going on. And I would look at it and I'd either check in with him. I would certainly, if I felt it necessary, I would take the appropriate measures to get him, if he needed to like get written to the office. So it wasn't that I was letting him off the hook. It was just that I wasn't confrontational because it wasn't about me. It was about him, and it was about me separate from him. I didn't need to add to the dynamic.
Yeah.
So that's what. When I stopped taking it personally, when I flipped the script that it could be something more, I was able to step away and like, it is what it was.
I love that example. It's because when you in that scenario, you recognize that, sarcasm, assuming the worst, um, engaging from that mindset almost always because this is the experience when we do that, it almost always escalates instead of de-escalates the moment. And it doesn't give you any context in which to know what to do next or how to respond. It doesn't mean that you ignore consequence, because I love that suggestion, which is like, all right, this is a really tangible way for me to be curious. Put a piece of paper on their desk, ask them to write down an explanation, which means they're already engaging and explaining, but I'm still teaching. And then when I can breathe and they can breathe, I can go back and review that and go, okay, what are we going to do about
Mhm.
this? And we still may have a consequence, but I'm displaying my script in front of all the other kids that's
Right.
making this kid feel misunderstood. Um, it's funny because I've been thinking a lot lately about, the dynamics of in our work and lives, when we run up against that thing that we're not quite sure how to solve. um, I call that that point of tension. And
Mhm.
just recently I started sitting on these three words. And sorry, I think out loud to my listeners,
Oh,
Daniel,
that's
so you
good.
get to hear this too. But I've been thinking about how that in some cases you just have to accept, like, okay, this is something I can't change. So that's one reality. The second response is, this could be something I could influence. So maybe there's something I could do to influence the outcome here that of how this is going to be. And the third thing usually involves some kind of choice. Like I can either step into this and see this happen, or I can step away from it and see that this happens. But all of those reflections require you to do what you said at the very beginning of our conversation, which is to be aware, like to step outside of the situation. And so I'm going to ask a follow-up question because I'm trying to voice what I think I would be asking if I was a listener to this and I'm an educator or a teacher or a leader. So, okay, Danielle and Will, this work is hard and there's like things flying at me every second of the day. I mean, I don't have 30 seconds before I'm already making another decision. So how in the heat of the moments do I begin to like apply and practice this kind of awareness and reflective response when things are so rapid in this work that we do with problem solving, kid behavior, curriculum, et cetera?
So when I work with teachers, what I have them do, there's two things that I think could be helpful. And I think it can be helpful for anybody in a caring profession. So anybody who's working with kids, school leaders, like any position like that. One is to track your emotions for a couple days. So actually like just have a piece of paper by your desk and track when your emotions feel heightened. And that could be challenging and not so challenging emotions. So it doesn't matter to me what you track, but track your emotions and then write down what you felt and what was going on. Because you can't change everything all at once, but you can start to see over time, okay, during my period 3 class, I get really, really frazzled when this thing happened, and maybe just start to focus on that one thing. Because what you'll find is that there's a domino effect that happens. And when you start to really pick apart something, you start to see that it's almost always the same sorts of things that are happening all over the place. And so that would be one thing, is just to like track your emotions. Another is to find time in your day that it's not about being reactive, but it's almost being proactive, to take a couple moments. And it could be to breathe. It could be to stand and like shrug your shoulders. It could be to walk briskly to get your mail and you just focus on like the briskness of your body. It could be, so I know teachers are going to say, and school leaders are going to say, I don't have time for that. You have to walk to the mailbox anyway. Can you get outside to do it? Like, I don't know. Can you stand outside and have a couple we can do these things. Like, I want to empower you. You can. There are times when you could figure out a little bit of tension relief throughout your day that could maybe make a big difference over time. It is small, minuscule habits over time that is going to change your career trajectory. It just is. So those are two things. I probably have a million more, but those are at least two to get us started.
No, I love that. Track your emotions. And when you recognize that they're being heightened, ask yourself, what's going on here? And then just pick one example when that happens and then dissect that example and ask that's good.
So I call it, yeah. And I mean, it seems silly because it's like, you're going to really like have me pick apart this one moment, like really, like there's so many things. But once you start to see what your patterns are like, it is amazing to see that my patterns are like this all the time. Like, this is but one example of it showing up.
Yeah. Well, let me add this thought because, you know, this past spring during March Madness, my wife and I really enjoyed watching the women's national basketball championship because of just the amazing things that those players were doing. And as you think about athletes who are just amazing at the peak of their games, the reasons that they are is because they've had, in some cases, a lifetime or years of analyzing their practice. So they pick it apart. And they have other people pick it apart. They look at their games, they watch their film, they review that play where they screwed things up, and they figure out, what did I do wrong here so that I don't do that thing the next time? And here's the thing I think is so important for us as leaders and educators and adults is, why aren't we giving ourselves permission to pick apart our own practices? And practice is more than like, did the students learn it? Practice is more than did I cover the curriculum? Practice is more than did I finish my to-do list? Practice is I've just had this moment with a student or a parent or a teacher or in this lesson, something didn't go right, or I felt something here that didn't set well with me. Can I take a step back from me in this moment and like analyze what actually happened there and then try to figure out how I can make changes the next time I'm in that moment?
Mhm.
That's powerful, Danielle. And even in the work I do, because I work now with adults in training and leadership and development, and every once in a while I'll run into a wall in learning with a group or someone, and I'll have to do the same thing, take a step back from that moment, and instead of feeling beat up by it, just go, huh, what happened there?
Mhm.
And why did I feel that way? Or why did we respond that way? And sometimes it takes a couple of days before that answer finally like comes to me. But if I didn't take that time to reflect, then I'm robbing myself of the same thing we want students to experience, which is when we reflect on our learning is when we can actually have that aha moment to find the next solution. Um, I have a couple of other questions for you, but any thoughts on that before we move forward?
No, what popped into my head when you were talking is I think that so often as educators, we probably feel so under the microscope from other people that the last thing we might want to do is to do that to ourselves.
Mhm.
So I want to just voice that I hear that and I understand that. So I do think that there is a level of vulnerability with this. But
Yeah.
that's really why I try to teach teachers how to do this for themselves. Like I'm not having somebody I'm not checking somebody's emotion journal. Like
Right.
like it's yours. Like you do with it what you want. I'm just trying to give you a practice of finding some relief from this. So that just came up for me and I wanted to voice that.
No, and I'm glad you did because I think that's so powerful. But you also said to find time in your day to be proactive, not reactive,
Mhm.
and which means that you are suggesting intentionality, which means that, okay, what are the small wins I can experience throughout the day?
Mhm.
Like you said, standing up straight or just straightening my shoulders or taking a brisk walk when I'm going, or maybe stepping outside and just peering at the clouds for 30 seconds and
Mhm.
just asking and just being aware that there's another world that exists beyond the classroom.
Mhm.
That sometimes just resetting yourself can help you to find those times where you are actually in control of
Mhm.
something, not just having to respond to it. Anything else you want to add to that?
No, I think that the more I call all of those practices like the practice before the big game of your classroom teaching. So, I oftentimes have people do like a 14-day journal where for 14 days they just try to do something and then they again record that or they track it themselves. Again, they're not sharing it with me, but they're writing it down. And I will tell you, I've taught hundreds of teachers, if not thousands of teachers, how to do this. And never once at the end are they like, I wish I didn't do that. Like they always are grateful for finding the time. Now, granted, it's part of a class. So like I'm their professor or whatever. So they have to do it for a class, but that's almost like a great excuse to like find the time. So I can guarantee you that everybody found the time. And it never was something where they were like, I shouldn't have done that. That was terrible. Like they found what worked for them and what didn't.
Mhm. Well, Danielle Nuhfer, your great book is The Path of the Mindful Teacher. And as we're wrapping up, I want you to just two more things. One is how can listeners connect with you in your work, especially if they would like to get you in for an opportunity to speak to them or with their teachers? And then what's a parting word of advice or an idea that you want to leave with listeners in this important conversation?
Sure. So anybody who wants to connect with me can go to teachingwell.life. And then if you want to make a call, I would love to just jump on the phone, and I run a program called Teaching Well in Schools. So I can bring the Path of the Mindful Teacher to your staff. So teachingwell.life/call, and you can just connect with me directly there. And the other parting words I would love to share with your listeners. I say this to as many school leaders as I can, is be the change, right? Like, if we want our teachers to believe that this is good for the students, this reflective practice, then share with them how you're doing those same sort of reflective practices, because I think it will create a culture that will shift your entire school.
If we want reflective practices for those we serve, then let's start with ourselves. Well, Danielle Nuhfer, thank you for the opportunity to introduce you to Principal Matters listeners. And Principal Matters listeners, I just want to speak to you directly, because whatever time of the year you're in, and you're probably going to be listening to this right in the middle of the school year, I just want to encourage you that the best time to start reflective practices for taking care of yourself is right now, not tomorrow or not next week or not next break. And it doesn't have to start big. It can just start small. So just think about what's one thing that you can do, just one thing that you can do as you step forward into your day that would help you just be a little more aware of your own responses, your own emotions in a situation, and then something you can do proactive to be more aware so that you're not just reactive in every situation too. And if you want to reach out to Danielle, please reach out to her. You can find her contact information in the show notes. Or if you want to reach out to me and I can connect you with her, I'm happy to do that too. You can always find my resources at my website at williamdparker.com. Danielle, until next time, thank you for doing what matters and for helping teachers and leaders. And Principal Matters listeners, thank you. And we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you.
You'll find free resources like this one at williamdparker.com. Subscribe for our free weekly newsletter, which contains bonus material, and also check out the links for Grow Academies, Masterminds, Executive Coaching, and Keynote presentations from my books, as well as from Principal Matters Associates. You can find out more under our speakers tab at williamdparker.com. Thank you for learning together, and thank you for doing what matters.